Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our 33rd meeting of the House Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, and I trust everyone had a very happy Thanksgiving. And the committee is meeting to
Point of
discuss...
order. Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Housefather?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, we're getting on the original audio, the French translation coming in.
Okay, just hang on a second, please. I was, yeah. I thought you were worried about my Thanksgiving wishes, and no, we're just looking. Can you hear it now? Is it translating? No, it's still coming in French, or just hold on. We'll try. We'll just correct that. I'm going to ask for a temporary suspension until we correct the issue. much, and let's try this again, and thank you very much to the technicians for quickly and astutely getting this straightened out. I do appreciate that. And so with that said, I call the meeting back to order. As I've indicated, this is meeting number 33 of the Standing Committee, and the committee will be discussing, we're meeting here to discuss a request by 4 members to undertake the study of the development cost of the ArriveCAN app. This discussion will be in public. In the second part of the meeting, the committee will meet in camera to discuss committee business. Today's meeting will be taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order of June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Regarding the speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best to make sure that we can maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether participating virtually or in person. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. Now, with that, we have a request. We had a request, as you saw just last week, pursuant to Standing Order 1064. And with that said, I'll now go ask Mr. McCauley, who gave the notice of motion on Friday on this subject. I will turn the floor over to him to move his motion. Mr. McCauley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I guess welcome to welcome back to Mrs. Block for like the 4th time for OGO. Welcome to Garnett. Oh, sorry, I thought he couldn't get translation again. Now I'd like to read in my motion that we put on notice. Do you want the full thing read in, Mr. Clerk, or is it satisfactory? Okay. That the committee undertake a study of development of a ArriveCAN app with a focus on the costs to develop and launch the app, that the committee dedicate a minimum of 6 meetings to the study, and that the committee produce a report and report its findings to the House. That the committee send for all documents related to the planning, contracting, and subcontracting of the app development. Sorry, Mr. Clerk?
There were certain revisions. I think what you may be reading is an earlier version than the one that was actually put on notice.
I think it's the most recent one I have.
I mentioned that simply because in the version that had gone out to the committee members, it mentioned that the documents were to be in unredacted format.
You will forgive me, I'm reading off the wrong form. That's all. I'll start again, I apologize. I'm new at this, it's only been 7 years on this committee. That pursuant to Standing Order 108, bracket 2, bracket, the committee undertake a study on the development of the ArriveCAN app with a focus on the cost to develop and launch the app, that the committee dedicate a minimum of 6 meetings to this study, the committee report its findings to the House, the committee send for in unredacted format all documents related to the planning, contracting, subcontracting of the app development and launch, including all requests for proposals, RFPs, all documentation related to the contractors and subcontractors, that the committee send for a breakdown of costs incurred by GC Strategies for the ArriveCAN app, and a list of all contractors and subcontractors involved in the development and launch of the app. That these documents be provided to the clerk of the committee in electronic format no later than 12 noon on the 10th business day following the adoption of this motion. That federal departments be required to submit documents in both official languages, that the clerk of the committee be instructed to transmit all documents received to the Office of the Law Clerk and the Parliamentary Council, OLCPC, and that the OLCPC be asked to make redactions that pertain to personal information, and that the clerk of the committee publish the documents redacted by the OLCPC on the committee's website. The committee invite the following witnesses. In addition to any further witnesses, the committee may consider relevant to appear: Minister Duclos, Minister Haiju, Minister Mendicino, Minister Blair, Minister Jasek, Public Services and Procurement Canada, obviously, Public Health Agency of Canada, Public Safety Canada, CBSA, Christian Firth and Darren Antony from GC Strategies, Richard Hyatt, the founding partner and fellow at Rotman School of Management's Creative Destruction Lab, Zain Manji with Laser Technologies, Sheetal Jaitley, Tribal Scale, Fad Anatta, Roach Capital, Gautam Lohia, Applied Digital CEO, Nick Van Weerdenberg, Wrangle CEO, that department officials appear alongside the minister, that they also be required to appear on a second panel separate from the minister, and that these meetings be televised if possible. Phew.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. And
Sorry.
is there anything further?
No, I just think it's important. Considering the massive costs of this program, the controversy around ArriveCan, but also the massive costs, $54 million. We've seen that a couple tech companies have stepped up and recreated the app for what they said would be, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars and not 54 million. They able to do it over a weekend. It also goes into some of the further studies that we're looking at on outsourcing of government contracts. Obviously, I think Canadians are appalled that, we have veterans on the streets in Edmonton having to go to food banks. We somehow have $54 million for an app that the experts are saying could have been done for in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think it's very important we see how this debacle, for lack of better words, happen, how a company with almost no employees received such a large contract and was allowed to subcontract out so many times to so many different companies. How the process happened, how the costs overran so much, and also who authorized the continuing cost increases for this app. I think Canadians deserve to know how the government is spending its hard-earned tax money and why 54 million. This reminds me, I'm reading a book right now called Victory of the Potomac. It's about U.S. defense reform, and they start talking about the $650 hammers and the $1,000 toilet seats. This reminds me of that issue, and I think Canadians deserve to, get to the bottom of it. So I hope the rest of the committee will support this study.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. And I see that Mr. Housefather's hand is up, and I'm assuming that he wants to add to the debate as opposed to he's looking for the translation issues. Mr. Housefather.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's correct. This time the translation is not going over the original audio, so I was able to hear everything my colleague, Mr. McCauley, said. Mr. Chair, I'm going to move an amendment to Mr. McCauley's motion, and then I'm going to speak to the amendment. I would propose to amend the motion, 1, that the first paragraph of the motion be modified by changing the word 6 in the third line to 2, and deleting all words in the third line following the word study. 2, that the second, third, and fifth paragraphs of the motion be deleted. 3, that the fourth paragraph of the motion be modified by replacing the paragraph with the following: that the committee invite the following witnesses: Public Services and Procurement Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada, Public Safety Canada, Canada Border Services Agency. That after hearing from these witnesses, the committee will determine whether other further meetings are required and the witnesses the committee considers relevant to appear. Mr. Chair, I've provided the amendment to the clerk in both official languages. And as soon as you're ready, Mr. Clerk, I'm happy to speak to my amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather, and that to all members that amendment has been sent out to you at this point in time. Mr. Sorry, and Mr. Janice, to speak to the amendment, correct? Okay, thank you. Mr. Housefather, just to give us a second to get that information out, and then I will ask you to comment on that, okay? All right, I'm assuming everyone has received the amendment, and so we are now discussing the amendment as proposed by Mr. Housefather. Mr. Housefather, we have you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I want to start by saying that I do believe the committee should look into ArriveCAN because of all of the publicity that's come out over the last week. What I don't agree is that we need to consider what may be a molehill, a mountain, and start with 6 meetings, start dragging in 5 ministers, and start dragging in all of the people who were involved in the disruption contest to try to recreate the app when one has literally nothing to do with the creation of a complex and secure app. And I think that the right way to go about this, because we have to take very seriously Canadians' concerns about what is alleged to be a high cost, is to bring in the 4 departments that are involved. These 4 departments can provide their understanding of what happened, the contracts, whether the costs were what are being speculated to be or not. And then the committee can decide, once we've heard from the people that actually were involved in these contracts, whether or not it was just to go further, to ask for production of documents, to ask for others to appear. I mean, obviously, there are many people out there that don't feel that those who created an app over a weekend were doing something that is consistent with developing this type of an app that the government had millions of people use. And so we would want to hear from those people who don't agree. I mean, this is really a group of people that is a wish list to hear that the app was too costly. And so I don't believe that's a fair way to begin. But I am willing, after 2 meetings and after we've heard from the departments, to go further if that is what the committee's willingness is to do, because the departments have been unable to satisfy us with what they come forward with. I do want to, though, say, based on what I've already sort of undertaken to do since I first heard these costs, I come from this industry, and I want to look at what I already know to be misleading information related to the numbers that Mr. McCauley cited. Whether the number is 54 million or 52 million that's been cited, one thing is clear. $25.377 million, so $25,377,165, that is being included in this figure comes from a competitive contract that was awarded earlier this year on the 16th of May 2022. The requirements were for the services of a contractor to maintain and support various CBSA applications, which would include ArriveCAN, but would include many other IMIT applications. This contract was awarded more than 2 years after ArriveCAN went live. This contract covers many different CBSA services, not just ArriveCAN. Yet somehow, this $25.3 million is being lumped in to the costs of the development of ArriveCAN. So right away, we can see that the number being used is clearly incorrect and highly inaccurate. What we seem to have found is that the cost to develop the first version of ArriveCAN was approximately $80,000. Subsequently, there were more than 70 updates that were done to ArriveCAN. The 70 updates that were done were because at various times over a 2-year period, the regulations changed and travel was different. And so ArriveCAN had to be adapted. Those 70 updates over the 2-year period cost a total of $8.8 million. So if you're looking at the cost of development of ArriveCAN, as opposed to multiple other direct and indirect costs of different things, for example, different apps that public safety has out there, telephone support lines that handled calls for Canadians seeking help with this app and other apps. The support for accessibility requirements for those with disabilities, meaning to enable people who were visually impaired to use the app, the necessary level of security when dealing with a program that handles Canadians' personal information, as well as touches on border security, costs associated with coordinating with provinces, territories, and other countries to verify the provided proof of vaccination was authentic, indirect support, maintenance, and upgrades of this and other apps. All of these numbers are being thrown in and out altogether, and they don't relate to the cost of the development of the app, which to my best understanding at this point, if you're looking at direct costs, was $80,000 for the first version that was launched and $8.8 million for the 70 subsequent updates. So I want to say that the officials that we would bring in would be much better placed to deal with this than I am. And it is important to hear from them so that they can answer the committee's questions, and I'm sure they will be tough, and Canadians' questions as to the costs of the app, direct and indirect. But I do have to say, Mr. Chair, that one of the things I think we need to be careful of, again, is not creating mountains out of molehills or mountains out of hills. And at this point, we don't have the necessary information to throw out the numbers that are being thrown out. But I can say that to the best understanding I have at this point, they are inaccurate. I want to also talk about the issue, because I do come from this industry, of a primary contractor versus subcontractors. In this case, there was one primary contractor. The Government of Canada engaged one company to do this work, and that company subsequently won the competitive contract that was awarded earlier this year for the $25.3 million that I mentioned, which again related to going forward support for and maintenance for this app and many other public safety apps. But that primary contractor cannot be conflated with the specialized people that it used to develop the app. We contracted with one party. Many companies in this industry don't just keep employees forever. They have certain work that they get at certain times that rolls in, and they have a small number of employees that goes out and seeks work and manages the work, but then they handle specialized subcontractors that are usually individuals that are hired on to work on the projects that they secure. And they go and get the people who better understand the area of the app they're asked to roll out. For example, here, privacy and international privacy law would be very important to understand because you're getting vaccination proof from many different countries. You need specialists to write the documentation, specialists to link this to the back office of the CBSA for security. You need usability for people to be able to have millions of people on multiple different iOSs using the app on different platforms. And so what we had here was there were one company that hired 23 people as subcontractors to help it deal on its contract with the Government of Canada. That is not unusual in this industry. Anybody who's involved in this industry will tell you that is very, very common. So I just wanted to also deal with that misconception, Mr. Chair. And finally, I also want to deal with the third misconception, which is that you can create an app over the course of a weekend that is identical to an app that people are creating like ArriveCan that has serious back office requirements, like password lookup, passport deals, airline flight timetables across borders and jurisdictions. When you're dealing with an app like this, you've got training, you've got documentation, you have a requirement on language, not just translation, but fine checking the wording to make sure it complies with regulations. You have procurement and licensing, you have deployment, you have parallel development platforms for testing the next version, you have source code repositories, you have backups, you have physical alternatives if the digital one goes down. It has to work in many degraded conditions. you have to have user testing on a wide range of phones and system languages settings. This includes testing scanners and the QR codes you scan on arrival, long pauses while someone finds their flight number while in line. This is not the same as just copying every interface and screen from the existing app or the navigation fields of every dropdown. It's an entirely different process. And anybody who's involved in the industry will tell you that this is sort of like you built a house and you added on at some point with the help of different architects, 70 different rooms, which are the updates to this app. And then you on multiple times redesigned and rewired the house. And then somebody comes and takes a picture of the house. That's sort of what the hackathon could be compared to. And it's not fair to compare an apple to an orange. So, Mr. Chair, just based on what I understand related to how this works, my recommendation again is let's call in the departments. Let's have the experts from the departments in 2 meetings from all 4 departments explain to us exactly what they did, exactly how they contracted, exactly what costs are direct related to the development of the app and which are indirect or not associated with the app. And then the committee can, at its discretion, based on what we heard, determine are further meetings really required, who do we need to hear from, and what documents do we need to get. But let's do it with a full and clear understanding of what actually happened versus lots of hypotheses, lots of speculation, lots of numbers being floated around that do not seem to me to be accurate. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that. And just again, clarification so that everyone's aware, we are debating the amendment at this point in time. At this, I have Mr. Genis first, and then I have Ms. Vignola. So, Mr. Genis.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just be 90 seconds on this. I think we need to get to a conclusion on this, but I will say I have a great deal of respect for Mr. Housefather. I would have more sympathy for his arguments if the Cadillac price had gotten a Cadillac product. I think it's pretty clear from what we're hearing from constituents that the performance of the app was so disastrous, and that for me is an important factor to take into consideration. People who should not have been told to quarantine were told to quarantine, and then we're in this weird limbo of having done everything right and being ordered by a glitch in a piece of technology that was extremely expensive. So again. The price should be commensurate with the quality, and for me that's an important factor. I would also just say the motion that my colleague put forward initially, it sought to recognize 2 important principles. One is ministerial accountability for the actions of their departments, and the other is the value of hearing from outside expertise. I agree with the principle that we should hear, quote unquote, both sides on this subject. One side is outside expertise that may be critical of the actions of the government, and the other side is ministers accounting for the decisions of government. But to call not ministers but public servants and not outside experts means we are respecting neither of these principles. We're not hearing both sides, and we're not able to ask questions of those who are ultimately accountable for those decisions. So I think this amendment misses the opportunity to hear from external experts who are disposed to be more neutral on the question, and it gives a pass to ministers who should be accountable for decisions that they are accountable for. On that basis, I don't support this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Genis. Ms. Vignola.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Of course, aiming for consensus in order to understand in this whole issue in an apolitical, apartisan manner, I agree with a minimum of 2 meetings to start. And then what I would propose would be to meet from the government departments, CBSA, SPA, PSPC, I would ask, the people from GC Strategies, And the list of contractors and subcontractors, the list of calls for proposals, a breakdown of expenses non-redacted, including invoices, and as I was saying, contracts. But I think that's a compromise between what had been asked for from the start and the amendment. So if we can agree on that aspect or those aspects, I've written it out here on my sheet of paper here. I could hand that over to the clerk so he may formulate that adequately. That would be my proposal. I'm not going to belabor this point. I think it's important to understand what is happening, and I always like to base my questions to the witnesses on documents we have received so that the questions are relevant, so that they're fair, and so that we get clear answers. You can call me St. Thomas if you like, but I like to have something visual in order to have a full picture of the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vignola. Now, are you proposing an amendment to the amendment? Do you have it in writing? We can give it to the clerk, and then thank you. And just for Mr. Housefather, Mr. Baines, just so you, as you can't see, at this point in time, we're just getting it done, and then we'll read it into the record so that you're aware. Thanks. Okay. So, Mr. Housefather, it's really not a sub amendment that's here. She's making some proposals to your to your amendment, and I'm going to ask the clerk to read that out to you and see if you're comfortable with accepting that as your amendment. Okay, Mr. Clerk.
Merci. Je vais le lire en français.
Thank you. I'll be reading that in French. What Madame Vignola is moving is to keep both meetings, but all four witnesses that are set out in Mr. Housefather's motion, but that we also add the two witnesses from GC Strategies. She would like the committee to call for the production of lists of contractors and subcontractors, the lists of a breakdown of expenditures, a list of contracts, the requests for proposals for all the invoices. I don't have the French term for invoice. So the only question I would propose would be, what deadline do we want to use for this document? The one that was in the original motion? We can ask Madame Vignola the question. what kind of deadline is she proposing for the submission of documents?
Thank you, Ms. Clerk. And just for hang on for a second, Ms. Vignola, and the deadline time for you, is that the proposal that you have similar to what was in the original motion, or do you have a different time frame?
10th business day? Still noon on the 10th following?
Still noon on the 10th business day?
Je suis assez d'accord.
I would rather agree with that 10 business days following. So what was in the original motion? Noon on the 10th business day following the adoption of the motion. Yes.
Okay, so with that, Mr. Housefather,
Et juste une autre chose pour
One more thing to make sure I have this correctly. Just to have a clear idea of what the committee wants. You want these documents to be unredacted? Correct, unredacted. And if possible, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, the ministers, if possible, to have the ministers appear. Did I mention that? No, you hadn't mentioned that. Not to me, says the clerk.
The witnesses Madame Vignola told to me were the four departments outlined in the original amendment of Mr. Housefather, which I believe was Public Services Procurement Canada, Public Health Agency, Public Safety Canada, and Canadian Border Services Agency, as well as two people from GC Strategies, Christian Firth and Darren Anthony. Those were the only witnesses suggested to me. Thank you.
okay, so and Mr. Housefather, I do see your hand up. I'm just right now, there's a little bit of banter, and which is good. I'm hoping to try and get that resolved so we can get everything. We're sort of be on the borderline here. Okay, with that said, we've got proposal by Ms. Vignola on whether Mr. Housefather would accept that as an amendment or his motion. But with that said, I'm going to go to Mr. Johns first, and Mr. Johns.
In regards to Ms. Vignola's proposal, which I support, can we just add one more witness, Mark Weber, the president of the Customs and Immigration Union, to appear as a witness as well? And I think Mr. Weber would provide testimony on how frontline workers were consulted on the development of the app and their experiences with it. I think it's important testimony to hear from. Would everybody be okay with that, just as an additional? It's Mark Weber, the president of the Customs and Immigration Union, hoping he can appear as a witness. Mr. Weber could provide the important testimony that's needed on how frontline workers that were consulted on the development of the app and their experiences with it. And, great. And I have one more friendly amendment I'm hoping that I can just put forward now, because it's easy for, I think, Mr. Housefather and Ms. Vignola. It's that, I'm a bit concerned about the proposed focus on the development and launch of the app. We'll miss why the costs for the app have continued to accumulate well past the launch. So, what are the new or recurring costs that have been encountered, and maybe a friendly amendment to include reference to maintenance of the app. So if you look at paragraph 1 and you go past undertake a study on the development, I would add in launch and maintenance of the ArriveCAN app, and then we could strike out with a focus on the cost to develop and launch the app. So it would be all-inclusive. And then paragraph 2, we could add after app development, strike and launch and maintenance. But I can bring this to the clerk if that would help. Okay. Ms. Vinola, did you?
Okay, Mr. Johns, sorry, you're basically asking for a friendly addition to what's being proposed. The challenges we have here now, we have an amendment to the motion and then a sub-amendment that wasn't really a sub-amendment, which was being asked, the amending motion to be done. Now you're adding another sub-amendment to the sub-amendment, a friendly sub-amendment with that said. What's going on, I mean, and I'm okay with getting, there's discussion and that's good that we can hopefully try and come to an agreement to get this straightened out. But at this point in time, we have an addition from Mr. Johns. We have Ms. Vignola's changes, which really are some additions to Mr. Housefather's. And so just so that everyone is aware of that, and now we have Mr. McCauley, who has the floor to hopefully iron it all out for everybody.
Yeah, thanks. I hate to pile on, but I think we're getting to a solution. But we just, if we're going to start with the 2-day, we just have a couple more witnesses from our original list that we wanted to hear from, and that's Mr. Hyatt and then the 2 companies that performed the successful hackathon. So, and I'm not sure how we add on to Mr. John's add-on to Ms. Vinola's add-on to Mr. Housefather's amendment. But I think we're getting there if we could add those 3 in.
So Mr. McCauley is pointing out an issue that as we add on one person here, one person there, we all of a sudden run out of time in those 2 days. There appears to be a suggestion, and there's some sort of nodding about maybe taking that 2 days to maybe making it 3 or 4, such that you can fit in these people. However, I'm just throwing that out there at this point in time. It's good to see that there's discussion and trying to resolve, but I want to make certain we keep this orderly and so that we don't lose the structure of what's going on. So with that said, I'm going to actually, Mr. Housefather's hand is up, and now we've heard from Mr. Johns, we've heard from Ms. Vignola, we've heard from Mr. McCauley. Mr. Housefather, hopefully some of this is acceptable to you and that you can maybe add a little bit more to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the collegiality of the committee, and I'd like to try to bring everything around to one amendment that everybody agrees to. So let's start by the 2 additional witnesses that were proposed by Ms. Vignola to bring in the company, which I think is absolutely fine, and Mr. Johns' request to bring in the person from the CBSA union, which is fine. So I'm in agreement with adding those 2 witnesses to the list of witnesses that I've now put into section 4 of my amendment. So instead of just saying Public Services and Procurement Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada, Public Safety Canada, and Canada Border Services Agency, it would add the individuals from the company proposed by Ms. Vignola, and it would add the individual proposed by Mr. Johns. I am not in agreement with the proposal of Mr. McCauley because, again, this assumes that the hackathon is remotely connected to the actual development of the app. And in the event we were to take those witnesses who somehow believe that their hackathon was related, then we would want to bring in any number of people who would say that it wasn't. And so I don't believe that that has anything to do with getting to the bottom of what the actual interaction between the government and the contractor and those costs were. So I agree with the additions of Mr. Johns and Ms. Vignola. I consider them friendly and happy to add them. With respect to the other request of Mr. Johns to use the word maintenance and not to just say development with a focus on development and launch, but to say undertake a study on the development and maintenance of the ArriveCAN app. I'm happy to do that also as a friendly amendment, and to add that to my motion, or to my amendment. And with respect to the documents, la production des documents qui a été demandée par
Documents produced, requested by Madame Vignola. I agree with Madame Vignola's request, which is to ask for these documents within 10 business days, and I have no problem with the list that she read. So, Mr. Chair, I believe that given those changes, we'll have a consensus, or at least the majority of the committee can support the amendment. And if you need me to draft the revised amendment, or the clerk can do so, that's fine by me, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. And before I go to Mr. Macaulay and then Mr. Kazmierczak, what I'm going to ask is, Mr. Housefather has basically read off and pointed out some of the changes that he's agreed to from Ms. Housefather and Ms. Johns and Mr. Macaulay. And at this point in time, rather than having to redraft, I want to make certain everyone is comfortable with those amendments as proposed by Mr. Housefather at this point in time, as we just discussed, just to make those changes to his amendment.
Yeah, you might not agree with the amendment. You might not.
Yeah. Or so we're just talking about the amendment or the changes, so just so that everyone's comfortable, and so that way we have that in record, and now we're discussing the sort of amended amendment as we go forward. Okay. All right, Mr. Macaulay, then Mr. Housefather. Sorry, Mr. Kazmierczak.
Thanks, Chair. And Mr. Housefather, I appreciate your comments and your attempt to find a solution, but I have to say it seems you're pushing to, rather than pushing to not expose, but to bring transparency to this whole issue, it looks like you're pushing to avoid transparency. And the two companies that did the hackathons and Mr. Hyatt, who was quoted in the article, I think are very important experts to address this issue of the cost overruns, the massive cost to Canadian taxpayers. I do not want to sit and listen to bureaucrats come in front reading talking points about how great this program is, how many lives it saved, etc. Canadians want to hear why this costs so much, what are alternatives to using using GC were, and how they could have delivered this program for a lot less money. I think excluding industry experts would basically neuter this study. And I'm not sure why it appears to me that you're trying to hide and neuter rather than bring light to this massive cost. I'm willing to, we're willing to move from 6 to 2. We've made a lot of compromises, but I don't think we're going to compromise on this. We do need to hear other experts. We're hearing from someone from the union on how they were consulted. We're hearing from outside people. I certainly think Canadians and Canadian taxpayers are owed it to hear from these other companies as well as Mr. Hyatt. So we're happy to give on a lot of things, leave the ministers for now, shorten the meetings, shorten the witness list, but these three that we have, I think, should be included.
Thank you, Mr. Macaulay. Mr. Kazmierczak.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and of course I will be supporting my colleague's amendment. I believe it is clear. I believe that it demonstrates collaboration. It finds that common ground, and it's common sense, and it brings together. It acknowledges the work that Mr. Macaulay has done raising this issue with this committee. Important questions. This is an important conversation. Canadians have questions, and they want to make sure that we establish the facts. I do believe we're going to be able to establish some critical facts when the officials come here for 2 days, of course, with some additional witnesses as well that Madame Vignola and Mr. Johns have proposed. And I think that is a very good start to this conversation. Plus, in addition, the fact that the amendment accepts Madame Vignola's recommendation that we produce the documents within 10 business days also underscores that we take the urgency of this issue, of this matter very seriously, and we want to get to the bottom of it and ask some questions and establish some facts on the ground. So this amendment is clear. It is commonsensical. And it's collaborative, and again, it demonstrates the urgency of this matter. And at the same time, I just wanted to add as well, too, in terms of moving it from 6 to 2 meetings to start, I also consider the fact that there's some important work that we want to get to as a committee. Working on diversity in procurement is a study that we want to get into. Same thing with advancing our study on naval procurement. The outsourcing of federal contracts. And so this is a really good start. It's timely, and we're going to get some answers for Canadians when the officials do come to committee. So for that reason, I wholeheartely support this as a commonsensical, common ground, and collaborative path forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzmierczuk, and I appreciate that, and recognizing that just so that everyone's aware, we're talking about the changes that Mr. Housefather, with the additions with that, and as opposed to what was originally proposed. Mr. McCauley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate, Mr. Kuzmierczuk, what you're saying. Can we settle on perhaps, Mr. Housefather, re-amending the amendment to the amendment, et cetera, to perhaps, as we said, to do a third meeting. It's a compromise between all 4 parties. And we'd be happy with the changes Mr. Housefather has brought forward if we could have the third meeting to add our witnesses that we consider extremely important to this issue.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. So right now we're having a proposal to change from 2 to 3 meetings. And in recognition of all the added names, et cetera, that might be something worthwhile considering just from a time point of view. But at this point in time, I see Mr. Housefather's hands up. Mr. Housefather.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to come back to, the comments of my friend, Mr. McCauley, who I have great respect for. The witnesses that are being proposed for this third meeting, I do not support at this time. The committee at this point, under the revised amendment, would have 2 meetings with the departments, with the company that was actually involved in the contract, and with somebody who was representing employees who were involved in the discussions. The parties that Mr. McCauley is suggesting had no involvement whatsoever in the development of ArriveCAN, no involvement whatsoever in the contract process, no involvement at all. They're simply people he wants to bring in who have a fixed and specific view without actually, I think, having the background or the knowledge of what happened, that there was an overcosting that was considerable and they could have done something very fast that would have delivered a different kind of product. Should the committee, after the 2 meetings, where we get the background from the department and the people actually involved, feel like delving further into the issue, the amendment that is proposed allows the committee to add additional meetings and additional witnesses. But rest assured that if Mr. McCauley wants to bring in the people he named who have a very fixed view of exactly what happened and who were involved themselves in creating the app and supporting the fact that there's this hypothesis Mr. McCauley is bringing forward that there was overcosting, there's an equal number of people we can bring forward as witnesses who would say the exact opposite, who would say that the hackathon has no relationship whatsoever with the development of this kind of an app. So I wouldn't just agree to add the witnesses Mr. McCauley wants to bring because they're witnesses on one end of the spectrum and who had nothing to do with the underlying question that we're looking at, which is what happened. After we find out what happened after these 2 meetings, if there's a desire, Mr. McCauley is free to bring in a request for additional witnesses. And if the committee wants to hear from that group of witnesses, we would propose other witnesses that would have a different point of view. But there's no need to have that debate right now before the committee actually knows what the real costs are for the development of the app, what the real costs and maintenance were with respect to the app, how many of these contracts related to other public safety applications and not just the ArriveCAN app, and how many related to telephone support and other things that are unrelated to the development of an app. And so we're putting the cart before the horse by jumping beyond what we have now called for, which is the 2 meetings and having the people that were directly involved come to the table and who can add the most light to these questions. I think adding the documents as requested, adding the additional witnesses as requested, very open to what was proposed by Mr. Johnson, Ms. Vignola. And again, I think we've come to a relative consensus, but I don't think it's fair to say that simply because we don't agree to add the witnesses related to the hackathon at this point, we're not being open and transparent. I think we are. And I think we've arrived at a general consensus, even if unfortunately my one colleague, is not happy with it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. And I will get Mr. McCauley. I believe he's going to try and explain what witnesses he's proposing. And at this
Mr.
time.
Housefather, I think you would find that the 3 parties sitting on this side of the table actually do agree that these witnesses should appear. You comment about, we can have witnesses. Your fear seems to be that these 3 proposed witnesses will only give one side. And you said, well, we can bring an equal number of people to say the opposite. I think you are bringing, with the witnesses from PSBC and others, an equal number of people. I can guarantee you, having sat on this committee for 7 years, every single time PSBC comes or any government department comes, they are there defending one side, and that's their side. No one from PSBC is going to show up and say, yeah, you caught us. We blew the bank on this. It's ridiculous, and I'm sorry, it's nonsensical to have a one-study study, only to hear from the bureaucrats to say how great a job they're always doing, and there's no cost overruns, and no one could have possibly done it better. Let's not hear from anyone else, and that's case closed. Let's move on. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this is we're trying to figure out why the costs have gotten so high, so overrun, when people have come forward saying, we could have done it for a heck of a lot less. If we only hear from one side, which is the bureaucrats saying what a great job they've done and how many lives they save and how much money they've saved Canadians, we're not going to hear the full story. I think my colleagues with the NDP and the Bloc have recognized, from our original witness list, we've compromised and whittled it down quite a bit. And I pretty think they're comfortable with kind of a compromise of adding them on a 3rd meeting, or whether it's 2 meetings and then 3rd meeting it's 1 hour, but I think they need to be part of this discussion. And I think Mr. John perhaps will be a mediator.
I'm trying to find a solution here.
Mr. Johns, just for a second, please. So before we do that, what I'm going to ask the clerk to do is to read out, so that everyone is aware of the names of the witnesses that we have at this point in time. And then once that's done, I'm going to ask Mr. McCauley to add the names of the witnesses that he believes that we haven't got on the list at this point in time. And then after that, I'll go to Mr. Kazmierczuk Mr. Johari, and then Mr. Johns. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The witnesses that are part of Mr. Housefather's revised amendment are as follows: Public Services and Procurement Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada, Public Safety Canada, Canada Border Service Agency, Kristen Firth and Darren Anthony, GC Strategies, Mark Weber, President, Customs and Immigration Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Mr. McCauley, your additions were?
From Tribal Scale, and I apologize in advance for pronouncing it wrong, Chatel Jaitley, and from Laser Technologies, Zain Manji, and then Richard Hyatt, who's with Rotman School of Management's Creative Destruction Lab.
Thank you. So now we have the clarification of what is being proposed. I'm going to go to Mr. Johari.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to, on the record, my colleague, Mr. McCauley, a number of times referred to a huge cost overrun. So at this point, I do realize the numbers that are being thrown out. We need to do a deep dive on it. And I'm not going to go into that level of detail or my understanding of when we do a software development. But yet I have to hear that there was a budget and the budget was blown. because my colleague constantly referred to budget overruns and expenditure. I agree with the expenditure. I agree to doing a deep dive, but constantly referring to it as a, budget overrun. I know I'm getting a bit technical, but I know a lot of people are watching out there. And when we pick the term of budget overrun and 54 millions or 52 millions, that means there was a budget. And I love to know what the budget is. I'm going to ask whether there was ever a budget and it was a budget overrun, and what is the cost breakdown is. All those questions are valid questions, but I would suggest we refrain from those terminologies until we have actually a good understanding of what the cost elements were, what were the decisions were being made. And I don't think my colleague, Mr. Anthony Housefather, is objecting to Mr. Kelly's having those witnesses. It's just a matter of timing. And you know what? That timing allows us to be able to do the 2 meetings as amended and getting a solid understanding, the breakdown with all the documents, and asking the tough questions that we are all going to ask from the departments and from other witnesses. And then we can collectively have another meeting that we decide and we say, hey, look, now we want to hear from whatever other witnesses, and we could submit our list. So I think there is an agreement to move forward, and I suggest that we actually move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Johari. And I believe, Mr. Johns, you've deferred your position to Ms. Vignola. Ms. Vignola, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure that I've understood. I am listening to both languages, both in French and in English. I just want to make sure that everything is clear. What we're saying is a minimum of 2 meetings, knowing that it is possible that we have a third, and that third meeting would be focused on the witnesses proposed by Mr. McCauley. Have I understood this correctly?
Yeah, thank you. And I think the third meeting is going to be including the witnesses that Mr. McCauley is saying, because we might want to bring others that would be able to be in a position to provide, So I don't want to limit. I don't suggest we limit the third meeting, if and when that happens, only to those witnesses. Thank you.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that we're good on 3 meetings. So we're going on 2 meetings. Yes. Okay, with the possibility of a third. So I'm sitting here going, well, why don't we go up to 3 meetings, in which case. Okay, it says at least 2. Okay, it says at least. Okay, that I get that. It says at least. Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to Ms. Vignola just to finish, because she had the floor. And then I see Mr. Housefather's hand is back up.
Donc,
So we would have a minimum of 2 meetings, knowing that it is possible, if there is smoke, that there may be a third meeting that would include the witnesses proposed by the Conservatives. Perfect, right? I've understood that correctly? All right, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vignola. Mr. Housefather.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais juste
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to share in French what I believe. I think it's in line with what Madame Vignola was just saying. I think we agreed on 2 meetings with the witnesses already in the amendment. We could have more meetings further to that if the committee decides that would be relevant, and then the 3 names submitted by Mr. McCauley could be a part of that third meeting. But as I said earlier, there are other people from the private sector that understand the situation in a completely different way. I don't think the people from the would be in a position to counter Mr. Macaulay's witnesses, who already have a very fixed position, or clear position, rather. I think we should have the right to bring in other people from the private sector who would bring in an opposite opinion. That's why I don't agree with adding those 3 names only. But if after that second meeting that my colleague feels that it would be good to have another meeting and she's interested in that, I agree to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. Mr. Johns.
I just want to be clear that we're voting on 2 meetings, but not limiting it to that, because we might come back and want to bring every minister before here, as well as the witnesses the Conservatives have proposed. And we may want to add to that list as well. So, I mean, let's just start with the vote on the 2, get these 2 meetings going, then we'll decide where we're going to go with the next meetings moving forward after that, because I don't want to limit it to just a third. It could be upwards of 6 if necessary or beyond. So, I mean, but we'll start with the 2 just so we can get a scope of what's going on here from the government side, and then we'll go with coming back with a list for future meetings beyond that, because I think the Conservatives have put forward some names that I think I'd like to hear from as well. So let's start with these 2 meetings and go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. And just so everyone's clear, I mean, ultimately the wording in it which helped me was it says minimum of 2 meetings. So that the minimum part allows that. And the committee at any time can go add more to it if that's what the committee chooses to do. So there's nothing to prevent the committee saying, as Mr. Johns has indicated, that after 1 or 2, we maybe want to add some more because of what we've heard, et cetera, et cetera. So there is that avenue for that. Okay, so at this point in time, we have an amendment and on the floor. I'm going to ask, is there any further discussion on the amendment? And I'm looking around the room and I'm not seeing any of that. And then, so I would ask for a show of hands of approval unless you would like a vote, in which case I would like a show of hands. Pardon? Want a vote? Okay, Mr. Okay.
Mr. Chair, just for the benefit of the committee members, we are doing the
Actually, sorry, before we do that, Ms. Kirk, could you read out that, and you probably were going to do that, but I just want to make certain if you could read that out so everyone is clear of what you're voting on.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So these are the changes that are, my understanding, are part of the revised amendment proposed by Mr. Housefather. Changing 6 meetings to 2, adding launch and maintenance after the words on the development in the first paragraph, and deleting the words with a focus on the costs to develop and launch the app in the first paragraph, and striking all words following the word study in the first paragraph. In the second paragraph, it would essentially be that the committee send for, in unredacted format, the following documents: the list of contractors and subcontractors, the list of costs broken down list of costs, essentially in French is liste des dépenses ventilées. Unfortunately, I'm not that good at translating on the fly. List of contracts, the demande de proposition, and invoices, and that the documents be provided to the clerk of the committee in electronic format no later than noon on the 10th business day following the adoption of this motion, and that the list of paragraphs include the following: that the committee invite the following witnesses: Public Services and Procurement Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada, Public Safety Canada, Canada Border Service Agency, Kristen Firth and Darren Anthony of GC Strategies, Mark Weber, President, Customs Immigration Union. And finally, that after hearing from these witnesses, the committee will determine whether other further meetings are required, and the witnesses the committee considers relevant to appear. If I may ask, Mr. Chair, did I get that all right?
I'm looking to Mr. Housefather to make certain that he's okay, so that is correct. And at this point, we will now call for a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The vote now. I call on Mr. Housefather.
In favor?
Mr. Johari.
Support.
Mr. Baines.
For.
Mr. Kazmierczak.
Support.
Mrs. Thompson.
In favor.
Mr. Macaulay.
Against.
Ms. Block. Mr. Genuis.
Against.
Madame Vignola.
Pour.
Mr. Johns. Mr. Chair, I have yeas, pour 7, nays, contre 3.
Thank you, Ms. Clerk. Okay, so we now are discussing the motion as amended. And is there any discussion of the motion as amended? And I'm looking around the room to see if there's any discussion, and I'm not seeing any. Therefore, I would ask for support of the motion as amended, or whether if someone requires a vote. Does anyone disagree with the motion? Not seeing anything. Carried. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so at this point in time, we're coming to the end of our public portion of the meeting. We will be going in camera. We had 2 hours of time limit, and we started at 11:15. So we basically have another 50 minutes. It'll take us about 5 minutes to go off and then come back in. Before we do that, and as we are still in public, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the committee. I've been working with this committee for the last 2 years, and it has been my pleasure to be working with you on this committee. I want to thank you for your professionalism and your respect for the committee chair and everything that we've done here. So with that said, I'd also like to indicate that, in my 7 years as a member of Parliament, I've been served on many committees, and it's been a great honor for me to be working with the clerk of this committee, who does a fantastic job, to the analysts who have done fantastic work here, and I want to thank them, as well as the technicians and all the interpreters, and I want to thank you for that. With that said, we will suspend. Oh, Ms. Johns.
I have to say a few words too. You've been, I've sat on a few committees. I've sat with you, Mr. Chair, on Veterans Affairs. We worked together in many roles, and I got to say, you've done a great job. Really good job of bringing people together, trying to find ways that we can work together, hold government to account. And I got to thank you for the way you work with other parliamentarians and for taking on this role in such a collaborative way.
Thank you. Mr. Kazmierczak.
I don't think we were ready for that one. So
Yeah.
here we go.
No, Mr. Chair, and besides the fact that we're both lifelong Leafs fans and long-suffering Leafs fans, which has bound us together, I wanted to say, I purposefully wanted to be back on this committee. I think this is an excellent committee that does excellent work, and I truly believe that Canadians are served well by the work of this committee. We find common ground in this committee. We work collaboratively together. We don't always get everything that we want on every vote, but I always find that all of us here come together, we put our heads together and try to find that common ground that advances the concerns and the issues that are important to Canadians. And Mr. Chair, you've been an incredible part of that. It's something I talk about OGO to my colleagues. I talk about this committee with great pride. And that has a lot to do with your leadership on this committee, making sure that it is one where, again, there is respect for the ideas and the members that sit around this table, and that is a great testament to your leadership and your ability to bring people together and your ability to communicate. So I wanted to say thank you, sir, for your service. It really has been a pleasure working with you over the last number of years. Thank you.
You and Ms. Thompson, this wasn't supposed to be that. It was just purely to Ms. Thompson.
I'll be very quick, but to say, as the person who's probably the newest around the table to this committee, absolutely thank you. Coming into a committee where there is history, the members who sit around the table, the person who is new to Parliament but also new to this structure, you were absolutely supportive in terms of your ability to be inclusive, absolutely collaborative, and I admire how, even in the challenging conversations, you were able to make space for all voices. So you will be missed, and thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to get to know you.
Thank you.
Je serai aussi brève.
I'll be just as brief. It's been a pleasure working with you. Perhaps we caused you to have a few more gray hairs than you would otherwise have liked, but I thank you for being so, or perhaps we caused you to lose some. We'll see, but you've been a chair that's been extraordinary. You're really listening and seeking consensus, and thank you for these 2 years. Thank you.
And much appreciated. And with that, we will temporarily suspend, and we will be back in camera in about 2 or 3 minutes. Suspend.